my name is Marley and welcome to my booktube channel. Today I'm going to be filming my best books of the year video. Basically, I'm going to be talking about my top 10 favorite books that I read in 2022, and it kind of worked out because I had exactly 10 5-star reads this year, or like technically 11, but you'll see what I did. So it really worked out perfect. And then I also have 2 honorable mentions that I'm going to mention first as well. If you didn't see my worst books of the year video, go check that out as well. But I'm excited to actually talk about some books that I really enjoyed today. Also, sorry, I have a bit of a cut on my lip here, so try and ignore that. Sorry, it looks ugly. First of all, let's go through my honorable mentions. They are both manga, just as a little spoiler alert. So first of all, I really enjoyed reading the Promised Neverland series at the beginning of the year. I binged most of the series and I ended up giving most of the volumes either 4 or 5 stars. I really love this series. I don't read a ton of manga, but this is one that just was so good that I would highly recommend. Essentially, it is about this orphanage where these kids will get adopted, but then you find out there's some sort of ominous stuff going on when the kids actually do leave this orphanage. We follow a couple really cute, endearing characters that are all very smart. If you like watching things with like super smart kids, if you like plot twists, this is sort of like a dystopian, thrillery, fantasy kind of series. I don't want to say too much about because I don't want to spoil, but if those types of things sound good to you, you should read it. The other manga series I read a bit of this year was Death Note. I have been reading this maybe like 2 years or so. I'm still going, but I did read quite a few of the volumes this year. I've talked about this quite a bit on my channel, but it's about this boy, Light Yagami, who finds this death note, which is basically a notebook where if you write someone's name in it, they will die. And he starts using it. This is also kind of thrillery, has lots of plot twists, and sort of like a mind game between these 2 really smart individuals, and it's very fun and entertaining to watch. So now let's get into the books. I tried to put them in the order of like increasingly getting better or becoming my favorites. So first up we have Shy by Annie Ridout, and this was definitely a surprise for me because this is a non-fiction and I normally don't read any non-fiction, but this year I decided to do a reading challenge where I read 3 different non-fiction books and just saw how I felt about them, and I really connected with this one. As you could probably tell from the title, it is talking about the experience of being shy and how you can still be successful. It gives some tips on like how to get over your shyness, but also just why like shyness is not necessarily this huge character flaw that people sometimes make it out to be. I just really related to it. The author talks a lot about her own experiences. So this was just a really pleasant reading experience for me and a relatable one, and it helped me realize that I do want to read more nonfiction, especially if it is like about psychological stuff. Not sure if I'm super interested in all of the memoirs and that kind of thing, but I think books like this I could definitely read more of in the future. In 9th place, we technically have 2 books. I'm cheating a little bit here, but that's going to be the second and third book in the Inheritance Game series, so the Hawthorne Legacy and the Final Gambit. I read them both this year and gave them 5 stars. I see a lot of people start to not like this series as much as it goes on, but I still did. Like, I can definitely understand what people are saying, but I still really enjoyed them and had a really great time. If you don't know what this is about, it's a YA thriller or mystery series about this girl who gets told that she is inheriting all of this billionaire's money and property and inheritance. She has no idea who this man is, so she has to go live at his manor, which has his family, and try and figure out what is her connection with this family and with this old dead billionaire. In the meantime, there's a bunch of his grandsons that live there as well, and a love triangle ensues between her and 2 of the boys, which was very entertaining to watch. There's a lot of riddles and puzzles and stuff like that. The series does end up getting kind of convoluted as we keep going on. I do kind of agree with people that it probably could have been a shorter series, but I still had such a good time reading these. I flew through them. I really did like the romances in here. So overall, I do still really recommend this series if you are into fun, cheesy kind of YA mysteries. Next up, we have a book that I've actually talked quite a bit about on my channel, so sorry about that if that's annoying, but it is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. Actually, it's not just me who talks about this series, it's everyone. This is a, I guess, new adult fantasy series, and this is the 2nd book in the series. It follows Feyre, who at the the beginning is a human girl who gets wrapped up in fairy politics basically. She gets brought over to the fairy realm, is living with one fairy, but ends up getting into sort of a love triangle situation between two of them. This second book was so good for me because Feyre and Rhysand, who is like the other guy that comes in after Tamlin, this is really their book to bond and build their relationship, and their relationship is like a combination of all my favorite tropes. They have, you know, enemies to lovers, they don't get along at first, the guy seems evil, and then you grow to kind of see that he's faking his sort of bad guy exterior. They start to grow like a friendship and a mutual respect, and then eventually love. And this is a pretty long book, so you're able to have sort of that slow burn kind of thing. I didn't love the ending as much once they do get together, when you have some certain reveals and some tropes that I don't love, but for the most part I had such a good time reading this. For some reason, some of Sarah J Maas's books have been really rough for me to get through, but this book, I was enjoying it so much, and I read it pretty quickly despite it being a pretty long book. I also liked the plot and fantasy elements of it. By no means is it only a romance. There's definitely some other things going on in this series that I really enjoyed. And I've said it before, but I just felt like this couple really reminded me of Damon and Elena from the Vampire Diaries, which is like my dream ship. So if you liked Delena, then you would probably like this too. So another one of my 5-star reads this year was The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. This is a thriller book about this woman who is living on this lake. She's taking a break from her real life due to some trauma that she's had, so she's just sort of relaxing and drinking as she is an alcoholic. She ends up befriending the woman who lives across the lake from her, and then one day this woman goes missing, and so our main character suspects that her husband has had something to do with it. So she sort of starts to investigate to figure out what happened to this woman who she considered her friend. It goes in some pretty crazy places. There's some spooky kind of paranormal elements where you're not sure exactly what's going on. Our main character is definitely unreliable as she is mostly drunk throughout the book. It was just a fun time, like all of Riley Sager's books are. Very fun to theorize throughout of what you think is going on, and I was definitely surprised by it. So definitely a fun thriller to check out. Another thriller I really adored was In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. This is just such a fantastically done book. We're following a group of friends who had one of their friends die in college. I believe it was never really solved, and now it is years later and they're all going back for their college reunion, and the brother of the girl who was killed is kind of like grouping them all together, and he's like, I know one of you guys is her killer and I'm gonna get to the bottom of it. And so we're getting flashbacks to that time when they were all friends in school together. We're seeing their different relationships and how each of them is kind of like a morally gray character. I thought the characterization in this book was really interesting. I don't know if I necessarily found it super shocking, but I think just the writing and how it was done was really impressive. And I, again, like I said, just like the morally gray characters and just kind of what the author did with this story and all the great tropes that were present. I just think this is a must read for thriller readers. Number 5 is going to be A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I read this pretty recently when I read horror books in October. I really adored this book. It was such a quick, easy, and beautiful read. If you don't know what it's about, it is sort of like a horror, fantasy, and romance book. Some really great tropes all put together, where we're following Dracula's first wife named Constanta, and we're seeing how she gets brought into his world. He turns her into a vampire, as you can imagine, and then we sort of see their life together and these different other wives or partners that he brings into their relationship. It deals with some very interesting themes. It's very beautiful lyrical writing. It's all written in like letters to Dracula, and the fun thing is like Dracula's name is never said. It's just you kind of know who it is. I just really enjoyed this one, and I think you definitely need to check it out if you haven't gotten to it yet. It will literally just take like one day probably, because you won't want to stop reading. Next up, I read my first Alice Feeney book, and it will not be my last, let me tell you that, but I read Rock Paper Scissors. Speaking of reading a book in a day, you can definitely read this book in a day. I read it when I was doing a 24-hour readathon, and it was such a good book for that. It was so fast-paced, so crazy. The plot starts with this married couple going on this weekend getaway to sort of reconnect. It seems like there's some really bad blood between these two. Some tension is there, so you don't even know, like maybe they're gonna kill each other kind of thing. But then it does seem like there is something at this little cottage, wherever they went to. It seems like there's something there with them that is also maybe trying to kill them. In the meantime, we are also seeing journal entries from the wife about their marriage, and you kind of see like the backstory on their relationship, which is always good. That's always kind of a fun setup for a thriller, is the two timelines and everything. Yeah, as I said, some crazy reveals. Not all of them make total sense, but I feel like you cannot see them all coming, and I'm really excited to read more Alice Feeney. I'm actually filming this before the end of the year, and I actually plan to read one more of her books before the end of the year, hopefully. So maybe that book will be on next year's list. All right, now we have my top 3 books of the year, and just thinking about these books, like, I just love them all so much. So we have Caraval by Stephanie Garber. I read this one quite a few months ago now, so I feel like my memory of it is not as good in terms of like the plot points, but I just remember having such a good time, rating it 5 stars and saying, you know, this is definitely one of my favorite books, and I'm so excited to continue this series. Early next year, I don't know why I've been putting it off, because I love this world so much, but essentially this is a YA fantasy book about these 2 sisters who are in a really bad situation. I think their dad was like abusive or something, or really controlling. So they get this opportunity to go to Caraval, which is this magical sort of carnival competition place, to win money, and like then they can win their freedom kind of thing. They end up going there, and then the one sister ends up getting kidnapped and being part of the games, a part of the competition. The other sister has to try and save her sister by winning the games kind of thing. So it was just so fun. Like, it was giving me so many vibes similar to Labyrinth, my favorite movie, of just like this girl in this crazy world, and you run into all these like interesting characters, and there's magic, and there's this mysterious, ominous person like running the show. I just was obsessed with it. So really enjoyed this one. Highly recommend for any YA fantasy lovers, although I feel like most people who read YA fantasy have already read this, and I know Stephanie Garber has like even more books, even more series out, and I'm just so excited to keep reading her work. And then we have The Mary Shelley Club by Goldy Moldavsky. This is a YA thriller book, thriller horror, and it is about our main character who goes to this new school. I think she's sort of like an outcast or whatever, has a mysterious past of why she's moved. She loves horror movies. It's like her comfort thing is watching horror movies. So definitely a fan of horror lovers out there. There's a lot of good references that are done in a not cringy way. But yeah, she ends up finding out this club at her school called the Mary Shelley Club, which is basically for fellow horror lovers. They do this thing where they do these scare tests. I can't remember the exact name, but I think they're scare tests where basically they like prank their classmates and make horror movies in real life, but then it takes a dark turn when someone ends up dead during one of these scare tests. So there's a whole mystery of like who is killing people, what is our main character's past. There is a love triangle. There is also like a kind of cheesy teen love triangle, but honestly it wasn't cringy or anything. Like, I just think it was so well done, very fun. Keep in mind that it's YA, but like it's very good. Definitely great for any Scream lovers out there. It definitely had Scream vibes, so I loved it. And the book I put at number 1 was Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I know you've probably seen me mention it if you have been watching my channel recently. This came out in just November. I just had such a good time reading it. I filmed a whole vlog for, if you've read it, I talked about spoilers in it, so go check that out if you have already read this. But it's the second book in the Legendborn series, which is a YA fantasy series that deals with Arthurian legends like King Arthur and Merlin and stuff, which is something I'm very into. But we're following our main character Bree, who is a teenager, but she ends up going to this special like college program. So she's on a college campus, and then she sees demons, and she sees people killing demons. Very Mortal Instruments vibes. But yeah, so she gets sucked into this secret society on campus where there's people who are descendants of the different Knights of the Round Table. There are these people called Merlins who have like powers and are supposed to protect the Knights of the Round Table. It's like a very intricate world, which is why the first book I dropped like half a star, because the world building was just a lot. Like, it was a lot of info dumping. This one I feel like is easier to follow. It still is a lot, but I feel like it makes it so interesting. Our main romance is just fantastic. Similar to the ACOTAR series, like the romance is such an important part of me loving this series. There's so many good aspects, like Bree, it deals with racism. It touches on like some very important topics like that. But at the end of the day, like, I love Bree and Selwyn and their relationship. It very much has that rivals to lovers, Delena aspect again. 10. So I'm just gonna keep saying it. Read this series if you're into YA fantasy. Even if you don't typically always love YA fantasy, this is probably one of the best ones out there. And look, it's beautiful. You should buy it. I don't know how many books it's gonna be. Potentially a trilogy, I would imagine, but if it keeps going, I'll be happy with that. But yeah, I've very much been enjoying it so far. So there you have it. Those are my favorite books of the year. I think it's clear I need to read more YA fantasy. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you read any of these books? And let me know what your favorite book of the year was too. I would love to read it and add it to my TBR. Thanks so much for another great year on BookTube, everyone. Be sure to subscribe if you have not already. And thank you so much for watching until the end. If you did, I'll catch you in the new year with a brand new video. Bye!